Hello, my name is Cody and this is my AVSA. In this essay, I'm going to be covering the basic of video games. I hope you enjoy. Architecture. Architecture is the structures that have been man-made or what you can make in your game. This can change the game a lot depending on what game you are playing. For example, a lot of PvP FPS games, the architecture is the map. This can be seen by comparing any COD multiplayer, Overwatch or CSGO. All the architecture in them games are mainly the buildings that you can or cannot run through. For example, you can open doors and go in buildings in CSGO and the newest COD. Whereas in Overwatch, there's no doors and there's just archways that you run through. However, it can give one team more of an advantage than the other. This can highly be seen in Rainbow Six Siege, where some maps favour defenders more than attackers. To counter this, the teams swap sides after 3 rounds are competitive. This is so it's evenly balanced, making it a fair fight and not one-sided. In my opinion, Ubisoft has done a great job at balancing the architecture and the way that it can be used in Rainbow Six Siege. There isn't just architecture in FPS games. Bloodborne has a good use of architecture. There are buildings that obstruct your vision, so you must go around them. This could cause an enemy to attack you from the architecture. In my opinion, this makes you feel more immersed because you get scared when a certain enemy jumps out on you. Terrain. Terrain is the natural habitat that has been built up around a certain area. This includes mountains, trees, and the floor that a player is standing on. Red Dead Redemption 2 is mainly built up of terrain because it's set in 1899, meaning there's hardly any architecture. In Red Dead 2, the terrain ranges from snowy mountains to grass plains. The conditions of the terrain can affect your player a lot. For example, if you wear thick, warm clothes in the plains, then your health goal will go down, making your health regeneration speed slower because you are too warm. The same goes for if you wear thin clothes in snowy mountains. Also, there are steep mountains that you must go around, as your horse cannot climb them, and if you attempt to do so, then your horse may die. However, in GTA 5, you can go up and down any mountain you want, at any time, and the weather will not affect your character. Because of this, you don't feel as immersed, making it feel like you're playing a game. In my opinion, this is how GTA should be, because of the actions that you carry out aren't moral. However, there is 2 things that can affect your car, the snow and the rain. They both make it harder to control your car, but the snow is only in one mission, whereas in Red Dead 2, there's always snow and its biome taking effect on your character. In my opinion, GTA 5 doesn't really need the same effects as Red Dead 2, because they're both set in a different era. Objects. Objects are not tied down to the floor and are able to be either picked up or used by the player. There can be many types of objects in games, a grenade in Call of Duty or a plant in Red Dead 2. If the player interacts with it and can use it, then it is classed as an object. Objects can give you advantages or disadvantages, depending on how you use them, or neither. For example, a grenade in Call of Duty can help you kill a player that might be hiding in a corner, but the enemy can do the same thing to you, or just plant a claymore that you'll run into. A negative about objects in Rainbow Six Siege are the radios. These radios play music that make it harder to hear footsteps or certain noises. Most people shoot these radios as soon as the game starts, or when they see them. This is so they don't have to do it later and attract attention to them. Just like other games, you can interact with people in Red Dead. However, the people you interact with in Red Dead are only classed as objects once you kill them, as you can pick them up, loot them, and do whatever you want with them. But when they are living, you cannot do this. Sometimes this can make you feel awkward or uncomfortable because you're taking a dead person's belongings. To stop you from doing this constantly, Red Dead has a system called Honor. It affects how people interact with you and talk to you. It also affects how the game will end, making you want to get the best possible ending so you loot and kill people less. Characters. Styles of characters are very different depending on what genre of game you're playing, or the setting of a game. For example, Fortnite has a very cartoon style because it is a non-realistic setting. Compare this to Fallout 4, where it's more realistic. Because of this, Fallout 4 has better visuals. In Fallout 4, you can customize your character and play through a narrative with this character. You feel more emotionally attached to this character because you're the one who has seen him develop through the story. If you compare this to Fortnite, where you just buy a character from a store for a certain amount of money, you don't really feel anything for this character when they die. However, this doesn't matter in Fortnite because of its genre being Battle Royale with no narrative. Meaning, your character will just respawn after he has died, and you can go into another game like usual. Compare this to when your character dies in Fallout, he doesn't respawn to do the same thing. He dies because of the mistakes that you made, and it's your fault because of this. This makes you want to get better at the game, so your character never dies again. Also, when you respawn, you know that there's a quest beyond this to develop the story, meaning you need to get it right and not have him die. However, Man of Medan doesn't have your character respawn, because you're not the actual character. You're the one controlling their actions, but your main goal is to have them all survive. But if one of them dies, then the story continues differently without them. Even if all your characters die, then that's the end of the story, and you can replay it, but this time, try not to get them killed. The consequences of the character getting killed is the emotions of the other characters being sad, meaning they won't carry out certain tasks, so it might get another character killed. Also, the deaths of characters can be very brutal and very gory. This is intended as it is trying to shift your emotions and make you do the right thing next time around. Whereas on Fortnite, you just disappear because you don't really need to care about your character. NPCs aren't just the people who you don't interact with. They can be anyone who isn't playable. For example, an enemy can be made to look intimidating because the developers want you to know of their status without actually telling you it. When you're playing through a narrative-based game like Man of Medan, you generally know who your enemy is going to be before you actually meet them. For example, you know that the coffins on the boat are going to do something because of the way that they look. This happens again in Man of Medan when you see the fisherman. You get that gut feeling that this guy is going to be bad because of the way that he looks. Feedback interface. Feedback interface is the information that is given to the player while they are playing the game. This can be anything from the scoreboard in Rainbow Six Siege to the kill feed in Call of Duty. You mainly find lots of feedback interface in first-person shooters and RPG MMOs. This is because the information is needed so the player can react to the actions that they've took or what other people have taken. The scoreboard in Rainbow Six Siege is classed as feedback interface because it's telling the player how many rounds they've won or lost. The scoreboard in Rainbow Six Siege is classed as feedback interface because it's telling the player how many rounds they've won or lost and the number of players left in the game. Instead of them pressing a button to look at the scoreboard, there's a smaller version at the top of the screen that doesn't get in the way. In my opinion, it's very good as it has helped me out in many situations, allowing me to win the round. There can be problems with feedback interface. Information overload is one of them. This is when there's too much information being displayed to the player. For example, for someone who doesn't play League of Legends, the information would be too much to take in, but for a regular player, this would be fine. In my opinion, any feedback interface can be good. It all depends on how long you play the game and how long it takes you to get used to it. Perspectives. Depending on how you are looking at the game will depend on how the game looks. For example, most 2D games will look very cartoony because they are 2D and it is very easy to make 2D cartoons. 3D games tend to look more realistic and more detailed because you're working with 3 dimensions and not 2, meaning the game will look a lot better and more advanced. First person and third person can also affect the style of the game. For example, you'll see everything that you're holding or using in first person, meaning it'll have to be more detailed because it's a lot closer to you. If you compare this to a third person game where you're looking over the avatar, then anything that you're holding won't be as detailed. However, all the scenery will be detailed as you can see more of it. This can be seen in Bloodborne as you can see more scenery than you can of your weapon. Aerial games tend to have a weird perspective as they are sort of 2D and a half, because the structures may look 3D, but you can't see behind them and they're 2D but on different angles. An example of this is Clash of Clans, as the buildings look 3D but they're 2D. Context sensitive perspective will change depending on what you are doing. For example, it might zoom out if you're climbing or zooming when you're aiming. This can be seen in Tomb Raider as it zooms in on your target when you are aiming with the bow. Interaction model. Avatars. The player interacts with the world through a single character. This is called an avatar. You can customize your avatar in games, some games more than others. Code Vein lets you recreate some of your favourite anime characters because of its huge range of customization in the game. For example, I made one of my favourite characters from Tokyo Ghoul. Also, you don't have to stick to this character, as you can save it and make another one that might be completely different. If you compare this to Fortnite, there's almost no customization, because you must buy an avatar from the store to customize the default avatar. This can discourage a lot of players, because customization is very important to some people, as it gives them more sense of personalization. But customization can turn some games into pay to win. This has happened in CSGO with the additions of player skins. This shouldn't be a thing in a game like CSGO, because it is very competitive. However, there is other forms of customization that aren't beneficial in any way. In my opinion, you shouldn't have to pay IRL money to customize avatars in games. Omnipresence. Omnipresence is where the player can control more than one character in the game world. This is a lot more suitable to certain games, as it wouldn't be interesting without it. The most popular omnipresence game would probably be Sims, as you're looking at above everyone and controlling each individual person. Omnipresence can be in any type of genre, as it doesn't have to be a life simulator. For example, Clash of Clans and Boom Beach are both games that have omnipresence in them. This is because you aren't playing as the troops, you're deploying them and getting more once they finish doing their job. If omnipresence wasn't in these two games, then it would be a very different gameplay, as you'd have an avatar, meaning you'd probably have to go into battles. Also, the omnipresence makes it so you can build and move everything inside your base. You wouldn't be able to do this with an avatar, unless they were some sort of superhuman. And if they were superhuman, then it would go against everything that these games have made. For example, The Sims are IRL life simulators, meaning it wouldn't be realistic if someone was superhuman controlling all as an avatar. In my opinion, omnipresence is done best on mobile games. Single player. Single player games or game modes have some typical features inside of them. For example, they all have a narrative. This is to keep the player involved and interested in the games, as they'd get bored from shooting bots all the time with no meaning. The narrative gives you meaning to shooting bots, because it gives you an end goal or an end story. For example, there's meaning and mystery behind the people you kill in Tomb Raider. When you start a single player game or game mode, you'll most likely have some sort of tutorial. This is to help you learn the basics of the game, but it also might be to help you learn the backstory of the game. However, this is not always the case with some games, as they might not have a tutorial. This could be to add to the mystery of the game, meaning you learn as you go. Bloodborne is one of the many games that does this, because there is nothing telling you what to do. However, if you go exploring and find some skeletons, then they'll tell you how to play the game. But if you don't find them, you don't get any information. But not all single player games need a narrative to keep the player interested. Sandbox games are the best example of this. Sandbox games tend not to have a narrative, but have lots of objects, challenges, exploration, and creation. Narrative games also have these, but sandbox games do these on a larger and bigger scale, so people can spend more hours grinding. In my opinion, the best type of sandbox games are survival games. This is because you're on a mission to survive, and there's thousands of things that you can do, curate, and explore. An example of this is Minecraft. You can do almost anything you want in Minecraft and not get bored. Multiplayer. Multiplayer games can differ a lot from single player. However, most games have both of these in one, but separate them into different game modes. so people who don't like a certain mode aren't stuck playing it. For example, people who enjoy playing single player games probably don't want to play with others and like doing stuff by themselves. The features in multiplayer games massively differ from the features in single player games. For example, in single player, it might be PvE with a tutorial, whereas in multiplayer, it's PvP and they expect you to learn the single player tutorial, so you know the game. Lobbies. Lobbies are something that are only in multiplayer games, as they are needed for the other player to either get ready or just communicate and have fun. Lobbies can differ in shape and size depending on what game you are playing. Loadouts. You can customize your loadout so you can use whichever items you want. For example, you could pick a different gun, perk, attachment or equipment when you're changing your loadout in Call of Duty, or any game like it. This gives you the ability to make your loadout however you want. Customization and microtransactions. Customizing your character can be a huge part in video games, as it can make companies a huge amount of money. Fortnite is a massive example of this. It's a free-to-play game, but Epic Games have made $2.4 billion in 2018 alone. They have made this money from people buying skins to customize their character. It gives them zero benefit, all it does is change the way that their character looks. A lot of people can get hooked on this and spend thousands of pounds customizing their character. Non-linear / emergent narrative. Sandbox games are most well-known games that have a non-linear narrative, because you don't need to follow the narrative to keep interested in the game. It's almost like the narrative is a side mission that you don't have to do, but it is also good to do. A good example of this is Dark Souls. You can do so many different things without having to play the narrative. The main reason why developers do this is so people don't get bored once they finish the narrative. If people got bored from not playing the narrative, then it wouldn't be a very good sandbox game. Most sandbox games don't mainly focus on the narrative, because they want people to play it after they finish the narrative. Ark Survival Evolved is another good example of this, because you can sink thousands of hours into doing loads of different stuff with or without your friends not doing the narrative. Use of maps from single player. Most COD games have based their maps on campaign missions. For example, the most recent COD has a map called Piccadilly. This map is based off a location you pass through in the campaign. However, they haven't executed it very well because the map doesn't play out like any other COD map. For example, most COD maps have a layout that they follow. This layout has worked for all the other previous CODs. However, Piccadilly doesn't follow this. It's a more of a round map that's just chaos. Also, you can hide inside buildings and buses. Therefore, it's not always a good idea for the developers to make all their maps from the campaign. For example, in the newest COD, Shoot House is probably one of the best maps, and it is not based off of the campaign. New features. Not everything that is in single player is in the multiplayer, and the other way around, because of balancing issues. If something works in single player, it might not work in multiplayer, as it might be overpowered. When something is too overpowered in a game, it offsets everything, as people want to abuse it, making people rage when people use it against them, because they can't counter it. For example, Deadeye from Red Dead 2 would be totally broken if people got it max level in story mode and then took it into online, because they'd be able to destroy everyone who hasn't got it leveled. Narrative. Triggered events. Triggered events influence how you play lots of games, as they can change what you're doing in an instant or in a while. For example, you could be going through a swamp in Red Dead 2 and suddenly someone might appear and try to rob you. Or you could be going through the country and someone might ask you for help. If you weren't going on that certain route or didn't go near them, then they wouldn't have appeared and asked you for help, or tried to rob you. Sometimes they happen in an instant, so you must react quick or you'll get killed. Emergent narrative. Emergent narratives can affect gameplay in lots of different ways. For example, in Detroit Become Human, there are lots of different paths that you can take. And if you take one path, then the other path will be cut off, so you can't play that certain path. It makes you think about your actions a lot, because you want to play the best experience of the game. But if you take the wrong action, then you won't be able to play that side of the game. Cutscenes and cinematics. You may not think it, but cutscenes influence the way that you play a game, because they're pre-rendered videos that don't give you a choice on what happens inside of them. For example, a tragic event could happen that could have been prevented if you had control. Most games have this in their cutscenes, as it forces the story in a certain direction, so you can either unlock new items or places. The main reason for pre-rendered cutscenes is to make the game look the best it possibly can be. However, cutscenes are becoming more useless because of new technology that allows games to look and play like you're playing a cutscene. For example, Detroit Become Human looks like you're playing a cutscene the whole way through, but you are still playing the game and making effects, changing the way that it can be played. Embedded narrative. Embedded narrative is pre-generated narrative content that exists prior to the player's interaction with the game. No matter the steps you take to avoid it, it'll happen. However, the outcome might be different depending on the steps that you have previously taken. For example, you can't avoid the deaths of certain characters in certain games, because it has already been decided that they're going to die from the start. A game that lets you prevent deaths of certain characters is Detroit Become Human, as characters might die from the actions that you have taken. Game setting. In my opinion, game setting is one of the most important factors of games. Physical. Where a game is located carries a lot of weight, because you can't have a close combat game that is in a massive open space. It just doesn't work, and it makes the gameplay rubbish. For example, Bloodborne is set in a gothic Victorian city because of all the buildings are close together, making it harder for the player to engage in close combat. Bloodborne would be trash if it was in a massive open space. It would lose lots of things that make it a great game. Temporal. The time setting of a game is just as important as the place. The COD franchise is a good example of this, as it has lots of different games set in different times. For example, you can't have a laser gun in a World War II setting, because it would ruin the whole reason for being a World War II game. Environmental. The environment restricts a lot of your movement, so it forces you to further your progress until you come back and unlock the area. For example, in Jedi Fallen Order, there are certain areas that you can only go through with special abilities. These special abilities can only be unlocked once you get to a certain point in the game. This is so you go back to the places that you've already visited in the game, making it a longer playthrough and you don't get as bored as quick. Emotional. Players and characters' emotions are both explored in games, as certain characters are given certain emotions to make you feel a certain way. For example, Mario is always seen as happy, which makes the game a happy mood, so you feel happy while you're playing it. There's also certain events that happen in games that make you and the character feel sad, or annoyed because something bad has happened. For example, when Lenny and Hosea die in Red Dead, you feel annoyed and sad at the same time, because you knew that they just died, but you could have saved them if the game had let you. Ethical gameplay. Just like real life, you're faced with moral choices and moral situations to teach you what is right and what is wrong. Sometimes games don't give you a choice, and you must think to yourself, is this right or is this wrong? For example, in Call of Duty, you shoot up an airport. You don't have a choice whether to do this or not. You must do it. However, while this is happening, you don't actually have to shoot the gun, as you know that this is wrong. Red Dead 2 has lots of moral choices all over it. By doing this, it teaches that you should be kind and caring to people, as it gives you rewards in the future. For example, if you're kind to someone, you might end up getting an item or a quest from them that can benefit you a lot in the game, or just save you money. Also, simple acts like saying hello to someone in the street can reward you by increasing your honour, so more good things will happen to you when you're playing the game. However, not all games are this good at morals. For example, Vampire doesn't give you any rewards for being good, but gives you rewards for being bad. Because of this, there is no reason for being good. You may as well be bad and gain loads of power. However, it's only a game and you wouldn't have to face these big decisions in real life. But If people think like this in real life and don't care for other people's lives, then something bad could happen. Goals, challenges, and rewards. Goals. Goals are set by the game, so the player have some sort of objective they can get to. Some people can get these mixed with challenges, as they are similar, but the difference between challenges and goals are that goals are usually the end point of a mission/level, and the focus of the gameplay. Challenges. Challenges aren't the end point, and can be set by both the player and the game. For example, beating the game would be a goal, but a challenge would be beating the game in a certain way or time.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Rewards. Rewards are received after you've completed a challenge or goal. Some can be permanent or some can be temporary. For example, you can get skins if you complete a certain mission in the campaign of the latest card. Whereas, if you complete a certain challenge in the campaign, you'll get XP tokens for the multiplayer. These XP tokens double the amount of XP you get in a game for a certain amount of time. Player actions, game mechanics, balance, and game structure. Player actions. A player's actions are controlling a character, object, or nothing at all. If the player wants to do something with the character, then they are the one controlling it. There are many different platforms that you can play games on. Each platform is a different form of controlling the game. For example, on a PC, you mainly use a keyboard and a mouse, but you can use a PlayStation controller or an Xbox controller. However, you can only use a dedicated controller for Xbox and PlayStation, but you're able to plug in a keyboard and mouse if the game that you're playing allows it. However, it's not recommended because there's lots of input lag. Any of the previous platforms that I mentioned can run a VR headset for games that are either built in or compatible for VR, except for Xbox. There's also a lot more platforms that run games on them. Here's a few more: Wii, DS, Nintendo Switch, and many more. Game mechanics. The key mechanics of games are inventory, win conditions, and scoring. These can all change depending on what genre of game you're playing. For example, the win conditions on COD are very different to the win conditions in League of Legends. The same can be said for scoring and inventory. Inventory is where you keep all the items that you have gained throughout the game. Depending on what game you are playing, will also depend on the items that you have in your inventory. Win conditions. Win conditions are the conditions that you need to get to win the game or complete an objective. For example, your team needs to get 75 kills to win a game of team deathmatch in COD. Scoring is the amount of score that you get from doing a certain thing. This score can contribute to the many different things. Balance. Games need balance in them, as it can be unfair to certain people. For example, if someone is unbeatable no matter who plays it, then it's going to be unfair. The same thing can happen with other things. For example, Dust 2 on CSGO is a terrorist-sided map. To make this balanced and competitive, they change sides after the first 15 rounds. This is so people who are good at the game don't get stuck on the bad side and lose the game. However, there isn't just a balance in online games. Mario Kart has the blue shell. This shell is the person in first place and only can be gained if you're in last place. Feedback loops fall into balancing, because it's a way to balance a game. There are two different types of feedback loops in games, and there are positive and negative loops. A positive feedback loop is where a game gives you a reward for doing good in a game. This can be a kill streak in Call of Duty. A kill streak in Call of Duty can be an attack chopper, which you need to get 12 kills or more in a row without dying to get. The reason for these positive feedback loops is to keep the player interested in the game. This is so you don't get bored of constantly doing good. A negative feedback loop is where you're given something for doing bad in the game, so it keeps you interested and doesn't make you want to quit when you're in last. An example of this is the blue shell, which I mentioned earlier. This special shell aims for the person in first. This is so you have a chance of catching back up with them and winning. By having this, it doesn't want you to make you quit the game when you are in last. This can spark a lot of drama and make it even funner to play with your friends, as it can always keep people on edge and tense to play. However, There isn't negative or positive feedback in certain games, like fighting or any type of competitive game. This is so the game is balanced and doesn't favour certain people. For example, if someone loses on the first round, then they wouldn't get any benefits for the rest of the game. This is because it is competitive, and the best players get rewarded for being good. This makes the worst players want to get better so they can win next time around. Game structure. The structure of a game can be very different depending on what genre of game you're playing. For example, narrative games follow a 3-arc structure, whereas PvP games mainly follow a kill or be killed sort of structure. So players must get good at the game to have fun. For example, if you fall behind on Rainbow Six Siege, then it'll be very hard to play, as everyone will have gotten better, whereas you're just stuck getting destroyed by other people. But there's always one structure that most games follow. It's called tutorial. Most games have a tutorial for the people to follow, so they know how to play the game, making it fair to newcomers of the game, so they don't get destroyed by people who have already played. In my opinion, games can be very bad if they don't follow a certain structure. Addiction. People can get addicted to games in very different ways, but the main way that people get addicted to games is through microtransactions, spending money on games to get better items or skins. For example, people can get addicted to gambling for skins on CSGO. People have made careers from gambling in CSGO, such as the YouTuber named Anomaly. He has built his career around buying and selling skins and profiting from it. He once sold a skin for around 32,000 euros. Luckily for him, he has profited from all the skins that he has bought and sold. But it is not the same for everyone, as people will keep buying cases trying to get a good skin that they can sell. But by the time they have got a good skin, it probably isn't worth it, as they have spent so much money trying to get that skin that they have lost money. However, people can get addicted to games in other ways. It's as simply as daily rewards. You log in, you get a reward. The more you log in, the better rewards you get. Most people forget to do their daily login, but others may dedicate a part of their day, every day, to get this reward from the login. An example of this happening is Fortnite Save the World. You get a reward for logging in once a week. You can get V-Bucks every week, which you can use to buy skins, meaning people only go on it every day just to get the login bonus. However, with Fortnite Save the World, your streak doesn't go away if you forget one day. It's something that most games don't do, as they want you to come back every day. Another way that games get you addicted is by doing the exact opposite of daily rewards. Resource decay is where your account level or items go down if you don't log in. It forces people to log in every day, so all their stuff that they've earned doesn't go to waste. But once it happens, most people will just give up and let their stuff go away, as it has ruined everything for them. However, it might make people get more addicted to the game, because they'd never want it to happen again. Clash of Clans sort of does this, because people will keep raiding you if you're not active on it. But the more you get raided, the less resources you have, so no one will raid you. Leveling up is an addiction, but a strange addiction to some people, as they think that it is not an addiction, because everyone levels up. But some people level up more than others. This is because they spend hours and hours playing the game. The COD franchise is a good example of this, as nearly all the games have a system called Prestige. Once you hit a certain level, you'll be able to Prestige. Once you've Prestige, you get a symbol next to your tag, telling the people that you've Prestiged. But once you have Prestige, you don't keep your level, because you go back down to level 1, meaning you must go back up there and grind to get back to that level so you can Prestige again. A lot of people get hooked on Prestige and leveling because they want to show it off to other people. Winning is also another unexpected addiction, because no one likes to lose in games, so people keep spending hours and hours on games to get good so they'll never lose again. Thank you for listening to my AVSA, I hope you enjoyed.